Today I'm going to be using this 2-foot piece of 20 gauge sterling silver wire. It's about 0.8 millimeters in diameter, and I'm going to reduce it to a 0.12 millimeters. And if you calculate the area of this versus the area of this, it's going to increase by about 45 times. So I'm going to end up with about 90 feet of wire. You'll need some basic tools like wire cutters. Definitely need a small pair of needle nose pliers. I've got steel dowels. These are center punches I bought at Amazon. Different sizes. I just use them to wrap the wire around mostly. In between processes, when I'm going to anneal the wire, I need to wrap it up into a pretty tight coil. I've got some oil to help the process. A very bright flashlight that I hold the die up to see that all the holes are clear before we get started. I've got things to clean out the die. It's very important that your dies remain clean. So this is a print head cleaning tool. It's 0.15 millimeters. I've also got printed circuit board drill bits that go down to 0.1 millimeter, so I can clean all the holes in my die plates. Got a spool. Ultimately, you want to spool your wire on something to make it easier to use. And most importantly, I've got the die plates. So this came from China. It's A quality. It needs to be, you need one to start out for the bigger wire and a separate one for the smaller wires. So this goes from 2.8 millimeter down to 0.26 millimeters. This draw plate I just received a week ago, and it's the reason I'm shooting this video, because it's a very different process to pull a heavy wire versus pulling a very fine wire. This goes from 0.245 millimeters down to 0.12 millimeters. I've got some sandpaper I use sometimes to help clean up the wire. And I've got a propane torch that I use to anneal the wire in between pulls. So this is actually MAP gas. You can use the blue tank, which is propane. It's perfectly fine. But this is just what I had on hand. So there's a lot of videos out there right now that'll show you what I just did, and I took it from 0.8 millimeters down to 0.375 millimeters. I annealed the wire before I started, and I annealed it one more time around, I don't know, 0.6, 0.55 millimeters. And I annealed it the second time just because it had corkscrewed and was starting to snarl. So if you anneal it and then give it a little bit of a tug, a little bit of a pull, it'll straighten the wire out and make it easier to keep going. It's good to wait as long as you can, because when you're sanding the end of that wire, it's nice to have it nice and stiff. It makes it easier to sand to get it into the next hole. So we're down to 0.375 millimeters, and this is, from here forward, is really about what this video is about. It's about getting down to a fine wire and how we do that without having to sand and file the end of the wire. So I'm going to anneal this wire, come back, and we're going to start pulling through the smaller holes. So tip number one, check the die to make sure all the holes are clear. So I just hold it up to this light. I can see they're clear. I've cleaned it with a rag and a little bit of oil on the rag, and I've used a small pointed dowel just to go inside the opening of the holes to make sure they're clear. The next thing I do is I actually I put oil in the holes that we're going to be using, so we're going from 0.35 down to a 0.26, and just a drop of oil. Set it in my vise. It starts becoming important that you pull that wire perfectly straight, because the outside of these dies are sharp on the edges. So if you pulled it off to the side, you're going to break your wire. The next thing I do, I don't want to monkey around anymore with the sandpaper trying to make the end of this wire small enough to go into the 0.35 millimeter hole. So I'm going to take a dowel rod. I'm going to wrap the wire around there once. Then I'm going to take another dowel rod. These are actually center punches. And I'm going to pull that wire and stretch it until it breaks. So by stretching the wire, what I've done is given it a smaller diameter. And now we should be able to go through here. So after stretching, like I just showed you, I can now go through the 0.35 millimeter hole easily. And I can even make it through the 0.325 hole. So I hope I'm going to get 2 pulls out of that one stretch. So pull number 1. And I'm having to go out the door of my 10-foot long shop. And now pull number 2. I'm going through 0.325 millimeters. This sterling wire pulls really easy. If we were using pure silver, we'd be having a hard time probably breaking wires. Now I'm going to anneal this again, because as you can see, I think you can see, it's all snarled up. It's like a big spring. And the second reason is I want to stretch the end of the wire again to make it a smaller diameter to go through my other holes. And sometimes things go wrong. I was wrapping it around my dowel and I let go and I end up with a big mess. So I'm going to take a few minutes to straighten it out. Okay, so I've straightened that mess out. I rewound it on that 3/4 inch dowel. I annealed it, and as I unwound it, about every 4 feet, I gave it a tug to straighten the wire and to make it a little bit easier to work with. So now we're on our way. We're at 0.325 millimeters. I've got 112 inches of wire here. We started with 24 inches. And I'm on my way from 0.3 to 0.26. So the first thing I'm going to do is give the wire another stretch and let it break on the end. It's a little bit of waste here, but I don't know, it's a lot easier than trying to sand a wire. So I've got a couple of small dowels, give them a wrap, and then I just gently pull until it breaks. And now we should be ready to go through at least one more hole. So we're finished with this die. I'm down to 0.26 millimeters. We started with 0.8 millimeters. I've probably got 14 or 15 feet of wire here. So now we're going to move on to the next die. By the way, I started around 9:45 this morning, and now it's just about noon.